Thanks very much. I just wanted to begin by acknowledging that we meet on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to elders past and present. So I'm going to present today on a project that is co-produced with the University of Melbourne and also with St Vincent de Paul. So Gavin is over in the back. This draws heavily on both ABS data, clean energy regulator data, but also tariff tracker data. There have been a number of people involved in this. The names are up there doing data analysis, GIS mapping, and the Melbourne Energy Institute, which is at Melbourne University, has been a generous funder of this project. So we're looking at, in Victoria, we're looking at Victoria, and we're looking at the socio-demographic characteristics of solar household uptake over time from 2010 to 2018. And we're trying to think about how this has changed over time and over space, and also how it's changing the market. So the goals of this project were to make publicly available data that reveals the heterogeneity of the consumer experience and in a changing energy market. For this data to be user-friendly and interactive, so we can enable consumers, advocates, and policymakers to find relevant data, which is why we're looking at the postcode scale, and also to interrogate that data using filters. And we're also trying to combine different data sets to generate new insights about the changing nature of inequality in the energy market and its geographies. We think this has policy application. It can help us to understand what kind of characteristics and capabilities enable households to do better in this changing energy market, but also what are the structural barriers. So we can start to see how competition is or isn't working across space to some extent. And it really enables more socio-demographic insights, which trigger more research, I think, about who the winners and the losers of the energy transition might be and who's getting left behind. And hopefully this will also help in designing market-enabling supports and regulatory interventions and tracking their effectiveness over time. Okay, so we have a website that has these maps that are interactive. The website hasn't gone live yet. This is still research in progress. We're hoping it will go live in about a month or so. Unfortunately, the IT wasn't working on this, so I've had to quickly do some screenshots to talk you through these maps. So the maps rely on, first of all, clean energy regulators, small-scale solar installation data. So you can see this mapped over here. What we did was we classified PV penetration at the postcode scale on from low to high, low, medium, and high, and then we had high plus and high plus plus because there was some variance from the mean. This is a relative indicator, so we're looking at how postcode PV penetration is changing relative to the state mean for each year. So PV, you'll only really see changes in particular postcodes. They'll only move from categories from year to year if PV penetration has increased or decreased relative to other postcodes. So then, I think I need to go forwards for this. So the other thing that we've done is, you can see back here, sorry, let me just choose this. This allows you to choose what is the ABS socioeconomic, relative social advantage and disadvantage indicator. So you can actually select with 1 being the most disadvantaged quintile and 5 being the most advantaged quintile. So in this map, you can actually select for a quintile. So here, sorry, I didn't screenshot it properly. I selected for category 1. So these are the most disadvantaged postcodes. And you can see that a number of things. First of all, they're not located primarily in the inner city metropolitan Melbourne area. They're distributed across rural and regional areas. If you add category 2 as well, you get quite a lot of coverage across the state. You can see that there aren't many in the low category here. If you look at category 5, so these are the most disadvantaged quintiles, you can see that it's really concentrated in the metro area with some distribution in other parts of the state, but not very far out, mainly into the Western District. Now, what you'll notice here is Metro Melbourne actually has, relative to the other postcodes, low penetration of solar PV. Now, one of the things you can do if you could see the maps is actually click on the loop function, which will let you see it's timed, and you can see how this has changed over time from 2010 to 2018. We've got a number of other filters which we think are quite interesting. You can filter by major urban and rural. We were trying to use the other urban category to see what might be some changes in housing developments, housing stock in the peri-urban areas where a lot of growth is. It's proving to be a bit problematic. I'll talk about that later. You can also see look at this data in relation to where the gas network is. So here you can click on, I might even have a picture of this. You can look at where the gas distribution network runs. Dual fuel areas perhaps gives consumers a bit more choice in terms of managing their electricity bill, whereas these postcodes around here have less choice. And then you can look at how that translates into the uptake of PV. I've got to go through this quite quickly, but I guess just in terms of the data that we used, we're mainly relying on high-level socioeconomic advantage, disadvantage data. It's not specific to energy, and it comes up with some findings, which I'll show in a moment, that really just provoke a number of questions for us. We can't take these as categorical findings, but they suggest that we need to look a lot more at some of the things that might be driving, particularly the what seems like relatively higher uptake in the lower quintile, so in the most disadvantaged postcodes, than in the most advantaged. In particular, tenure type, regional location, house size, and these are some that we've already started to do the analysis on, and we're about to look at house size, English proficiency, household composition, and pensions and concessions as well. The other thing I didn't mention, is that using the tariff tracker data, you can click on a particular postcode and it will tell you, we used an index time series to look at how the reference price has changed from 2010 to 2018. So that's the average price of the market offers by the three incumbents. And we've also then looked at the price spread, which is the difference between the highest market offer and the standing offer, and indexed how that's changed over time. The green line tells you that in the suburb of Coburg, the state mean is at 1, and the PV penetration has actually tracked just below the state mean quite consistently over this time. And the yellow line is a translation of what's actually happened in terms of percentage of households with PV over that time. Okay. One of the early findings is that PV installation, it's more complex than simply saying that PV installation tracks with affluence or social advantage. So what we're seeing is that the more disadvantaged postcodes have a higher penetration of residential solar PV. And we were a bit puzzled by this, and so we adjusted this for dwelling type, so we excluded in each postcode flats, apartments, and other kinds of dwellings besides separate houses and townhouses, and the relationship didn't change that significantly. We adjusted for dwelling type and tenure, so we excluded rentals and other occupancy categories, and it increased the spread between the highest and the lowest quintiles. So this is what you're seeing over here. So all of this really just provokes a series of other questions. What are the other indicators, variables that we might want to drill down on to try and explain this? I just wanted to quickly talk about some of the challenges we experienced in doing this. Postcode scale data is compelling to a broad audience, and we really want to engage a broad audience in doing this, but it's harder to find the data that you might want on things like, say, digital inclusion. I talked about the problematic other urban category that kind of puts peri-urban growth areas and regional towns together. We might want to look more at some of the changed built environment data sets that the Victorian government has. We have problems with small baselines, particularly in rural postcodes, that can inflate the PV penetration in some cases, and we had to adjust for that. The safer data is very high level, and advantage can actually offset disadvantage through this index. So once again, you need to drill down, look at things like pensions, concessions, English proficiency, etc. And finally, how do you do this in a user-friendly format? The more filters we want to put on this, because it gives more interesting information, the more my GIS mapper keeps saying, can't we keep this simple? I was thinking with Gavin about what some of the dream pieces of data might be to do this better. how could we easily access data that shows technology change over time for different socioeconomic groups? So postcode scale data is about metering types, about where the PV is and where the EV is as it's emerging. For the social safety net, to understand how this is evolving over time with the changing technology and markets. We would like to get postcode scale data on eligibility for concessions, who's actually getting those, same with who's on hardship programs, and data about collection cycle payments. And finally, and Gavin might talk to this more in Q&A, it'd be great to get the average cost paid by postcode so we can understand what's happening, how market and non-market interventions are shaping outcomes. Okay, thanks very much.